Hold up, what if the greatest wealth transfer of our lifetime is sneaking right under our noses? And what if grabbing just a single slice of it is as simple as rethinking two coins that you probably already heard a million hot takes about? Okay, so a quick disclaimer. I am not a financial advisor and nothing in this video is financial advice. Cryptocurrencies are highly volatile and you could lose all the money that you invest. You should always do your own research and consult a qualified professional. Your investments are entirely your responsibility and you should know that nothing is ever guaranteed when it comes to investing. Neither I, this channel, nor YouTube are liable for any losses. This video is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Okay, story time. So picture me last Tuesday, 7 a.m, still in my pajama shorts, balancing a overfilled mug of coffee while scrolling through the kind of usual crypto Twitter and chatter. I stumble upon Coach JV's latest kind of rant declaring no, practically screaming, in fact, that Bitcoin and XRP are still billionaire-factory machines even after a decade of price fireworks. Now, I almost spat my coffee out all over the keyboard. Now, haven't we kind of missed that boat? But something, in his voice kind of reminded me of those kind of friends who swore off Apple stock in the 90s because the big gains were gone. So I took a breath, I clicked play, and that is when the rabbit hole sucked me in. First, Coach JV's kind of piles on a stat that stopped me cold. About 95% of all Bitcoin that will ever exist is already in someone's pocket. That's only 5%, 5 that remains unminted. Now that means that fresh supply is basically locked behind a glass case and the line of buyers is spiraling around the block. So if every millionaire on earth wanted a full coin, well, math says that they can't all get one. Now, scarcity is suddenly more than a buzzword, right? It feels like musical chairs with every expensive soundtrack. Then there is Eric Trump. I know, right? Politics aside, stick with me because he's dropping his own spicy take. And he says, nobody is selling and everybody wants Bitcoin. Now, even his conservative price guess kind of lands at around $170,000. Now, that's like calling Mount Everest a decent hill. But here is the kicker. Big names, kind of balls like, Samsung, Mo, and Robert Kiyosaki and CZ, if I can actually talk, and of course Jack Dorsey, are all tossing around $1 million per coin grenades like they're kind of frisbee at a family picnic, right? And you'd have to ask, me 2 years ago, or if you'd asked me 2 years ago, if I'd kind of I would have probably rolled my eyes. And now, of course, I'm stuck still, checking if I remembered breakfast. So I start digging deeper. President Trump signs an executive order to hold, not sell, Bitcoin for the US Treasury. A kind of sitting president basically treating BTC like digital Fort Knox. Now, that news alone made kind of my neighbor's Shiba Inu perk up. Meanwhile, of course, Bloomberg is quoting kind of Zia Yosef, saying that the UK's sovereign fund risks looking poor in 30 years if they skip Bitcoin. So it's kind of like FOMO on a national state level then. And just as I'm kind of piecing together that mental kind of corkboard with red strings, you got Cedric, jumps into my podcast queue. Now he compares buying Bitcoin with $100,000, buying Bitcoin at $105,000 in 2025, and compares that to snagging Apple stock in 1995. So let's kind of pause right here because you'd kind of plucked $1,000 into Apple back then. Well, today you'd be kind of sitting on roughly $63 million. Now that's enough to buy a small island, or at least that kind of weird mega yacht shaped like a swan that keeps popping up on my targeted ads. So I'm pacing around my living room, coffee long gone cold, trying to wrap my head around what a supply shock plus institutional hunger might actually look like. And that is kind of when the XRP twist slams into the plot like a Marvel post-credits scene. You see, Bitcoin hogs the spotlight, but XRP is the quiet kid drawing schematics for the future of cross-border money. Now, Coach JV, isn't shy here either. He argues that once Bitcoin lights the way to $1 million, well, the tide that kind of, lifts yachts and, dinghies, if you will, alike, will send XRP rippling, right alongside. So you can cue, Farina, with his math, if Bitcoin tags $500,000, XRP could pop 4,000% to $100, meaning that if you're holding 10,000 XRP right now, what, about 20 grand? Well, your stack balloons to a clean $1 million. And yes, I hear the skeptics. Price predictions are the astrology of crypto. But man, what mainstream voices and on-chain data starts harmonizing, I have to lean in. Okay, so one sip of my reheated coffee later, and Barry C's analysis drops into my feed. XRP between $500 and $1,000 by 2030. Now that's kind of speculative vapor until you realize the thesis isn't detached hype, right? It's pegged to institutional flows that barely existed when XRP first debuted. So picture banks, payment processors, and even small governments testing tokenized settlements the way that kids test ripples by tossing pebbles into a pond. Right, the increments may seem tiny right now, but we forget exponential curves that start flat. Now, let me confess a personal pain point here. Right, back in 2013, a buddy begged me to buy Bitcoin at $150. I had the cash, I had the Coinbase screen kind of open, but I kind of chickened out last minute because my landlord called about the kind of busted water heater and imagined all crypto vanishing overnight. So I fast forward and my buddy retires early while I still juggle coffee mugs in pajama shorts. Now that kind of sting, it made me kind of promise never to ignore asymmetric upside again. So when Coach JV, and company lay out the kind of supply math, and when Trump, Bloomberg, and Apple analogies all kind of line up, I have to start paying attention. But there is a dilemma. Everyone's always shouting moon, but most rockets crash. So how do we separate warp speed narratives from kind of tinfoil fantasy then? Now I default to probabilities, right? Bitcoin's hard-coded scarcity is pretty transparent. Anyone can audit it. Compare that to kind of fiat money printing like confetti at New York's, at least New Year's party. And XRP, well, its lawsuit saga brought an ugly headlines, right? But clarity often acts like a spring. So once you kind of compress and release, you start to get a fast rebound. Now we're watching regulatory mud clear in real time, and the soundtrack is pretty bullish banter. But let's go ahead and talk numbers, because storytelling without receipts is just campfire fluff. Now Glassnode's data shows long-term holders control roughly 70% of Bitcoin supply. The translation here is that the flow is tight like jeans after Thanksgiving. Meanwhile, of course, daily issuance halves every 4 years, so new supply is like a dripping faucet while demand is a gushing fire hose. So on the XRP side, you've got Mazzari reports that even with escrow unlock, circulating supply has trended into stronger hands post-SEC ruling. And in payment corridors from Southeast Asia to Latin America, pilot programs using XRP as bridge liquidity are also quietly scaling. So that's not tomorrow's maybe. It's actually happening while I'm rambling into this microphone right now. But the climax, at least in my living room detective kind of arc anyway, arrived when I plotted rough scenarios. So picture Bitcoin at $1 million. Even if you grabbed 0.2 BTC today, roughly kind of, browsing for a kind of used sedan, you'd actually be staring at $200K ticket. That's not yacht money, but definitely pay off your mortgage money, right? Maybe, depending on where you are. XRP, well, 10,000 tokens could snatch you, at least kind of snatched for less, than a used vintage iPhone. Well, if you'd actually, if the $100 call hits, boom, that's $1 million portfolio. Sure, that's kind of cherry picking rosy predictions, but it isn't every investment thesis, right? Just an odds game and probability. And that is where the kind of mindset really sneaks in, right? Earlier, I said that Bitcoin is like musical chairs, right? The psychological twist, right? Most people won't even stand up until half the chairs are gone. Fear of looking silly outranks fear of missing out. So until the kind of price forces headlines into every single living room, we're probably not going to see these numbers just yet. And so I'll drop that last aha moment then, right? We keep comparing Bitcoin to Apple, but what if history rhymes differently? Apple's value came from products. Bitcoin's comes from mathematics that governments can't downgrade with an overnight decree. Apple had competition, Bitcoin has countless imitators, but none with its kind of scarcity or security track record and immutable launch, right? Meanwhile, of course, XRP isn't trying to dethrone Bitcoin. It's attacking a $155 trillion cross-border settlement market that still runs on tech older than dial-up. These are different lenses, the same highway of global value flow though. So where does that leave mere mortals like us then? Well, I can't tell you to buy, sell or hodl, but I can tell you what I am doing. I'm nibbling, I'm dollar cost averaging small bites each payday, right? Treating crypto allocations like I treat gym reps. They're consistent, they're moderate, and eyes are on the long-term muscles, right? And just kind of, just to kind of keep my sanity and curiosity in check, I hang out in the free educational Discord server. There's a link down below. Seriously, right? Pop in and let me know if you think, Cedric's Apple analogy is genius or just garbage, right? You can debate, they can, of course, get pretty spicy, but never toxic. So we keep it pretty learning friendly. Oh, and before I forget, if you're hunting for a fresh trading playground, I've been test driving Blowfin's crypto exchange. Full disclosure, the link in the description is an affiliate link that helps support the channel. So if you do sign up and trade, you're basically tipping the barista. That's me, by the way, for more caffeinated kind of content. Now, I wouldn't shout them out if the spreads were trash or the interface felt like it was from 2009, but I do genuinely actually like their order flow transparency. So why don't you go in, kick the tires if you fancy. Okay, so let me wrap this up by zooming out, right? Economists, they love to procrastinate, but none of them actually predicted the meme stocks or the dog coins, right? What they do admit is that the paradigm shifts, they never look obvious until they pass the rearview mirror. So Coach JV's kind of bold claims about millionaire making Bitcoin and XRP might sound, delirious today, but so did emails back in 1993. Remember the snarky little jokes, right? Why not just fax it? Fast forward, entire industries choked on their own skepticism. So maybe Bitcoin at $1 million is wishful moon math. Maybe XRP at $100 is daydreaming, but maybe, just maybe, we're actually standing at the foothills of something that our grandkids will treat as kind of obvious history. Now, when that kind of nagging little voice whispers, isn't it too late? I picture the 1995 Apple investor shrugging, scribbling another buy order while, everyone else kind of hunts pennies in coupon books. Future millionaires, they aren't usually the loudest typers on Twitter. They're the quiet accumulators who did uncomfortable homework when headlines screamed bubble. So, friend to friend, here's the takeaway, right? The train has not necessarily left, right? It's still loading coal and selling tickets. The kind of price board clicks up every so often and it never kind of clicks back down. So if you hop on, set realistic time horizons, manage position sizes that you can emotionally stomach, and please, triple underline, please do the research yourself. And if you decide to sit back and watch, hey, that's a strategy too, so as long as it's deliberate and not, dictated by analysis paralysis.